There's a saying, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's probably, if we're honest, that's probably why you're here today, right? You might have the best curriculum, you have a solid plan, and you even have the best resources on the market. But for some reason, when you try to put it all together, it all falls apart. So today, guess what? On my show today, we're going to be digging into common mistakes that parents make when it comes to lesson planning, and I have some quick fixes for it that hopefully will make everything smooth. Welcome to Miss Asia Educates. So, if lesson planning feels overwhelming, confusing, or frustrating, I want you to hear this clearly. This isn't because you're a bad homeschool parent. Many homeschool parents or parents in general were never taught how to lesson plan, right? They have this notion, they see all these fancy videos on YouTube and all these resources and the best blogs, but no one really breaks down the ins and outs of a structured lesson plan. So oftentimes that leads to parents just going with the flow and just really relying on a good curriculum to try to map out that learning. And even though you may have a great curriculum or even a bad curriculum, that's not really what's going to get your child to achieving those goals. All right. Remember, a curriculum is a tool, not a plan. So it's important that even though you have a curriculum, to make sure that you are still lesson planning, still figuring out how you can set your goal and how through the lesson planning and by the use of the resource and the tool, the curriculum, you'll be able to get to the ultimate destination, so to speak, where you want to go. You want your child to learn the concept. That's how you want to do it. All right. So yes, it's not your fault. It's simply you're not given the tools. So that's what this video is all about. So oftentimes why lesson planning feels hard is because number one, many parents are relying on page numbers and they feel like that is a lesson plan. There's no clear daily learning goal and lessons feel long and draining. Additionally, on top of all those things, you just don't know maybe where to start, where to end, how long the lesson should be, all these other factors that weigh into it. And let's not even forget that maybe you're lesson planning for not just one kid, but maybe 3 or 4 kids, or kids that are on different age ranges and levels. So with all of this in mind, lesson planning can definitely feel strenuous and just mind-boggling to many parents. So let's go ahead and go into what a lesson plan really is. All right, so as we stated before, a lesson plan is simply what a lesson plan is in simple terms is it is a plan. Lesson plan isn't a script, it's a guide. Let's say it again. A lesson plan is not a script, it's a guide. So when you lesson plan, no, you're not supposed to be typing up a whole novel to break out every single point and second about what you're going to do during the day. No, it's simply a guide from beginning to end. Hey, this is what I want to teach my child. And at the end of it, they should be able to do this, right? Simple. Good lesson plans let's keep this in mind. Good lesson plans don't make you rigid, they make you calm. All right. So when you have a good lesson plan, it creates clarity, it reduces decision fatigue, and it helps you teach with intention. All right. It's all about the intention of the whole thing. All right. So let's keep that in mind as we continue to go into lesson planning and what that is. So here are just a few mistakes, 4 simple mistakes most parents make when they lesson plan. All right. Number 1, relying on page numbers to lesson plan. Now, this particular mistake is just like a drop off the cliff, I feel like, because just because a curriculum says, oh, to complete this, you just do page 1 to 5 or page 24 to 27, that's not a lesson plan. That's simply not a lesson plan. That's filling out a worksheet, right? That's not what that is. Now, when instead what you should be doing is taking those page numbers and putting it within a lesson plan framework and simply saying, okay, I'm going to use this resource, this curriculum, these page numbers, and I'm going to bring them off the page, or I'm going to discuss it, or I'm going to model it, or I'm going to model it and teach it for 5 minutes, give it to my child, maybe have them do like one portion of the practice, and then maybe at the end, maybe have them write like a small little summary about what we did, something like that, right? So we're not just relying heavily on the curriculum. We're relying on, hey, this is my goal. Let me complete my goal first. Then let me do my lesson. Let me do the goal. Let's go ahead and make sure the goal is aligned, following the lesson plan from beginning, middle, and end, and then making sure that the goal of the lesson is completed and that we are working toward mastery for that lesson and that concept. All right. I hope that's clear. But yes, page numbers are not lesson plans. Page 24 to 27 and just putting that for the day that, hey, we completed it. That's not lesson planning. That's not showing a proper structure that's going to have your child be successful at the end, and for you also to be clear about where we're going, right? So yes, do not rely on just page numbers when you lesson plan. Actually try to structure out the lesson from beginning, middle, and end, starting with your learning goal, some instruction of some sort, student practice, and then of course closing in or restating what the goal is so that you guys know what you did, right? It's a little different. You can kind of see the structure there. It should be a nice structure, and then that's it. All right. So no more page numbers. Okay. So now mistake number two that a lot of parents make is the lessons are way too long. Short, sweet, and to the point is going to give success every single time. All right. And honestly, just because something has a longer instruction time does not necessarily mean that that's better learning for both the adult that's teaching and also the student. What often happens is the child loses interest. Maybe it becomes a lot more, the information becomes too much. And then all of a sudden you have behaviors all of a sudden popping up. You have them saying, oh, this is boring, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe they're just not focused anymore because the lesson was way too long. Actually, when let me look up here on the study that I did here. And simply put, so basically, pre-K through 12th grade students' attention spans generally follow a rule of 2 to 3 minutes per year of age, ranging roughly from 10 minutes to 15 for young children to 30 to 50 plus minutes for high schoolers. So if their attention span is only, for example, pre-K and kindergarten, 4 to 6 year olds, their attention span is only 8 minutes to 18 minutes. So guess what? That lesson plan needs to be 3 to 5 minutes, and then maybe a practice could be another 5 minutes to meet their attention span. Early elementary school kids, ages 7 to 9, their attention spans are only 14 to 27 minutes on average. So that lesson plan maybe can be 10 to 15 minutes max. But guess what? If the lesson or the instruction is 10 to 15 minutes, by the time they get to practice, and maybe that's like their limit, by the time they get to practice, they're going to be done. They're probably going to be checked out, right? So it's really important to really understand how much time can they generally pay attention to whatever you're teaching them. And then from there, cater your lesson plan to that time span. All right. So I'm just going to go over the time spans for each and every grade level. We've already went through pre-kindergarten, early elementary school, and then we'll go into the other one. So upper elementary school, ages 10 to 12-year-olds, their attention span is on average from 20 minutes to 35 minutes. In middle and high school, their attention span from 13 years old and up can be from 30 minutes all the way up to 50 plus. It just depends on the student. And that's why being a homeschool parent is such an asset, and it gives our child an advantage because we know our children. We know how much time they need. We know if they are a 8-minute attention span child, and we know if they're a 50 plus minute attention span child. So if you have all of those ideas, then guess what? You're able to create an impactful lesson plan in a time frame that works best for you and your child. All right. So keep that in mind. Short and sweet is way more impactful than long, drawn out, and boring. Okay. We do not want that. And remember, there is a difference between instruction, that's when you're talking, right? And practicing, or maybe a we do thing where you and your child are completing something, or your child is completing something. Remember, when you're learning, the one that's talking is the one that's learning. So if you're the one doing most of the talking, that might be the issue, right? Let your child talk, let your child engage, let your child practice, etc., etc. All right, so let's get to mistake number 3. So mistake number 3, when we are talking about this, all right, mistake number 3 is no clear learning goals. This one is a big one, right? Because if you don't have a goal, and I've said this in all my videos, but that's because it's just so impactful, so important. And this piece oftentimes is the reason why a lot of homeschool structures just go crumbling down, because parents don't know where they're going. You have to know what your learning goal is. Ask the question, what should your child be able to do by the end of today's lesson? If you can't answer that question, then you need to go back to the drawing board and you need to plan out what it is. All right. And then how to do it afterwards. All right. So that's just straight into the point. You need to set learning goals, and you derive those learning goals from your standard. Your standard is the big idea. Remember, the map. And the learning goals are just the simple road maps, or the simple roads to get to that destination on the map. All right. So if your destination is, my child will be able to multiply and divide 2-digit numbers, how are you going to get there? Oh, number 1, my child has to know how to multiply. My child has to know how to divide single-digit numbers. Then my child needs to know how to do different strategies to multiply 2-digit numbers and divide 2-digit numbers, right? Are we putting it under are they doing mental math? Are they writing it out and, lining up the numbers according to their place value? There's so many different strategies for so many different things. So it's up to you to figure out, okay, how are we going to make sure that step by step we're able to get to that goal? And you do that through your lesson plans. All right. So mistake number 3, no clear learning goals. You're basically going nowhere. You have to know where you're going in order to lesson plan effectively. All right. And then mistake number 4, no lesson plan at all. Now, I've seen some videos. I've seen some conversations on TikTok. I've seen a bunch of different things as I'm, going about and just being a part of different homeschool communities. And a lot of people are like, nope, we don't lesson plan. Planning to fail. Okay. You need a lesson plan. You need something, a guide, because how are you going to know exactly what you need to do in order to get to that goal, or in order to even follow a pathway to understand your child's success? That lesson plan needs to be created, because guess what? When the lesson plan is not created and you're doing just random stuff, you're just pulling from the air, you get overwhelmed, you get overworked, you have no peace. And then all of a sudden, your child's doing the work, and they're one moment, it seems like, they're doing pretty good. But then the next moment you're like, what is this? What type of work is this? What is the outcome? Right? So no, please, please, please do yourself a favor and lesson plan. Lesson planning will put your mind at ease. It will put your child's mind at ease, and it will make your homeschool flow so much easier. All right. Trust me, I know the difference between when I lesson plan and how my weeks go, and then when I don't lesson plan and how my weeks go, and I'm just shooting from the hip. And before I know it, I'm like, oh snap, I didn't even address any of the goals I'm trying to accomplish. I'm over here doing random stuff, right? And I accidentally made that I actually made that mistake when I was early teaching back in the day. Like, in college, they would make us do these long, drawn out lesson plans and essential questions and all sorts of stuff, like these intricate long, I'm telling you guys, they were so long. I promise you my lesson plans for the week were like 12 pages. But that was as a licensed educator, right? An early teacher licensed educator, right? But then as you get more and more acclimated, as I got more and more acclimated, I'm like, oh, I don't need to draw this out. I can just basically start with the standard and go from there. But then there were some weeks I wanted to wing it, and it was just chaos. Behaviors everywhere. I didn't know where I was going. It was just a mess. But even in homeschool, like the week that I decided, hey, maybe I don't really need a lesson plan this week, chaos. All right. Do yourself a favor, give yourself a guide. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to hit everything in that lesson plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that the lesson plan is going to be perfect. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything that you do in the lesson plan is just going to be, oh, sometimes they're going to flop. Sometimes you're going to find things that some activities you do that just doesn't work for your kids right then. And that's okay. You're learning. And the more and more you learn, the more and more you lesson plan, you can tweak things and then you can adjust in order to make it work for your homeschool. Okay. But please do yourself a favor and lesson plan. Okay. Please lesson plan. They can be short, sweet, and to the point. They do not have to be long and drawn out with 15 pages. All right. No. Lesson plan, please. All right. So let's go ahead and we're going to go into a faithful word here. So we're going to go into our biblical truth of the video. All right. So we plan because we care, and we plan. So we plan because we care. We plan because we want our children to grow. But planning doesn't mean we control every outcome. So remember, even as we're planning during this time, we are still putting our eyes and our hearts and our minds on Christ. So Scripture says, I guess I can call this my biblical moment, but anyway, Scripture says in Proverbs 16:9, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So even as you are laying out the plan, you're laying out the perfect activity, you bought the curriculum to follow, you have all the best technology ready and waiting for your child to just engage, right? At the end of the day, still the Lord is in control. So just continually just submit to his direction, submit to his voice, continually read your word, and make sure that's like the beginning. Even before you start, I would even suggest to get into the word even before, and then pray so that God can guide you through all the ins and outs of your homeschool. Because at the end of the day, we can plan as much as we want. We can plan the most perfect lesson we want. By the way, there's no perfect lesson, but we can do all that. But at the end of the day, God's going to guide us to what our child needs in that moment, in that season, period. All right. So just remember that. Okay. Lesson planning is us doing our part, thinking ahead, preparing well, and teaching with intention. But God is the one directing each step, including the lessons that don't go exactly the way we planned. All right. So keep that in mind, keep that in your heart. And let's go ahead and go to setting expectations with peace. All right. So even as your lesson planning, plans will change. Like I've stated earlier, some days will be shorter. Some days may be a little longer. Some lessons may need adjusting, but that's okay. You still showed up. You still had a plan to get to the goal. And now you can adjust and figure out what else needs to be done in order for your child to be successful and understand the concept you're teaching. Okay? So adjusting a lesson isn't failure. It's good teaching. So give yourself credit where credit is due. All right. So just in a final closing encouraging word, you don't need to plan perfectly. You need to plan clearly and trust God with the rest. All right. You're not behind. You're not doing this wrong. You're building meaningful, one intentional lesson at a time. So let's say it again. You're not behind. You're not doing this wrong. You're building something meaningful, one intentional lesson at a time. In the next video, I'll walk you through a simple 7-part lesson plan structure you can use for any subject without overwhelm. All right, so let's continue to plan with clarity, teach with flexibility, and trust God in the process. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys the next time. Grace and peace. Bye-bye.